Good morning, everybody, and thank you for everybody in the room who have attended. Not the easiest of days with the weather conditions, so thank you for that. Somerset is a very big county, so I know some of you have driven quite a way. And thank you for those online as well. And I want to welcome members of the public who've joined us as well. I'm Claire Sully. I'm the acting chair of the committee, of the Scrutiny Committee. I just want to give best wishes to Councillor Slocum, who is on the leave of absence until April, and just to thank her personally for her support to me, as I was elected vice chair and started off as the acting chair immediately, but she's been very helpful in supporting me. I also want to welcome Lucy, Councillor Lucy Trimnell, who is, I'm assuming she's online, I can see. Welcome as a new member of the committee. We look forward to your participation.
Thank you.
Just to remind you that the agenda pack with papers is available on ModGov, or directly from the council website, which has been sent to all members. The usual protocol of using the microphones when you speak, please, and turning off when you have finished your speaking. When I invite somebody to speak, I will usually say your name, but if not, please introduce yourself. I always find it quite useful to know what division you represent as well. If you're inclined to let us know, that's quite useful. Another protocol is the chat function on our Teams. I can't read any of the chat, but my wonderful support here in Scrutiny will give me any messages and stuff, but please just use it for council commenting on council business. I've never seen anyone not do that, but it is a protocol just to remind people. I've already welcomed the members of the public and media. If there's any that have joined us, we don't think so, but they may join us shortly. The agendas are now viewed electronically. Can I remind committee members, please give us the page numbers. That's quite helpful, particularly for the speakers and who you're questioning, to know where you're referring. Right, so we're going to begin with Jamie's going to do the apologies for absent.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. We have received apologies from Councillor Hobbs, for whom Councillor Lovell is substituting, and then we have 4 members of the committee online, which are Councillors Stanton, Trimnell, Robbins and Lawrence.
Thank you. So the next agenda item is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting on Thursday, the 10th of October.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lawrence has her hand up. She wants to bring her in.
Councillor Lawrence. I think you may be muted.
The hand's gone, Chair, so maybe we can carry on.
Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. We are to approve the minutes. Has anybody got any comments? Over to you, Jamie, on this.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any comments. Otherwise, I'd seek a proposer and a seconder.
Second.
Thank you, Councillors Bruce and Curlstone. Minutes approved, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. To remind members to declare any interest and to make aware that a list of committee members' personal interests as members of district, city and town and parish councils is available for inspection on the website. So with any of the agenda items, is anybody at this point, would you like to declare your interest?
No hands up, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, public question time. We have not had any notification of any questions in advance, and I don't think there is any. And it would be at my discretion to allow any questions at this stage. Item 5, the work programme, which has been sent to all committee members and to review and give us any feedback on any items that you think are missing. We've added what was discussed in the last committee. So is there any members of the committee would like to give us their thoughts and views on the work programme, please? Councillor Alston.
Thank you. I note that on the, let me find it again, almost briefing on the 27th of February, I was wondering, we did request when they last came to adults, that's Avon and Somerset Constabulary, if they would give us an update on domestic violence cases, which is there's a specific group that begins with blue. I forgot what it's called right now. And they were going to do that when they last attended. So I don't know if that's requestable for that particular meeting with the time.
Well, yeah, we will take that forward and we'll come back to you. Thank you. Anybody else?
We should ask this before a meeting.
Yeah, Councillor
I was
Wakefield.
just looking at the things that were in red from last year about dentistry, most of them. I mean, I wasn't on the committee then, so I don't really know what was discussed, but I'm not quite sure why their rag status is red and nothing seems to be happening about them. Or does that just mean we can't do anything? I don't know what that means.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, there are items on there that are red because of a challenge to get progress on those. And I think you'll see that dentistry probably relates to at least two of those. I am fairly removed from this committee normally, so apologies if has there been a dentistry update recently?
We have agreed they'll come next year.
Okay, so then hopefully we'll be able to clear some of those
I'm
reds.
not sure if everybody would have heard that.
Okay, so there is a dentistry item scheduled for next calendar year. So hopefully with that we will be able to get some of those reds turned to green. Hopefully. That's not to say we will, because I know that there are some very strong views around dentistry in the room.
Yeah, because you can see that the key says no action currently in place for a minimum of 3 months since action agreed. So perhaps we can review the reds and then just circulate that.
Sure.
Yeah, because we know how important it is for Somerset residents' dentistry to be constantly scrutinising that. So that will be in action. Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Wakefield's picked up on one point. Maybe we could add a column onto this work programme if there's any kind of notes about actions or where we are with that. Just a bit more detail would be helpful for us. Thank you.
Great suggestion. We will do that. Thank you. Is there any other? Oh, Councillor Govia.
Yeah, it's Councillor Goby from Wellington Division. Going back to the issue that's just been raised about dentistry, I have to say I'm extremely disappointed with the progress or lack of it that there's been. Or we were told as a committee, I think it was before this council, this quadrennium or 5 years, aren't we? But that there was an action plan for dentistry to be rolled out across Somerset, and I was told they would said the particular areas, and I was obviously parochially talking about Wellington, and I was told that yes, there was the contracts had been signed, and there was going to be dentistry rolled out into Wellington. It wasn't just Wellington; it was across Somerset from the savings that had been made because the NHS wasn't having to pay any dentists, none of the dentists were doing NHS work. But it just seems to have drawn a complete blank. I've emailed the people who came to those particular meetings and asked them personally for an update and received no response. And I hear what is said. It's talked about, next year. I know we're only like a month or so away from next year, but I really think this is, it is a really important issue to every part of Somerset, and I really think we should be shaking the tree a bit to get a response from NHS Somerset or whoever would actually be dealing with it.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. That's all I can say. And we will come back. And I think we should look with urgency to address this and to see if we can get it onto the next available committee, really, some kind of response. So I will talk to the team and see what we can do. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on committee members? Anybody online? Right, thank you. We'll move on to item 6, month 6 budget monitoring. And before we begin the presentation from Christian Evans, would our lead exec member, Councillor Wakefield, like to just introduce this item? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is, as people are finding in this year for our budget, we've generally got some good figures coming through, and some forecasts are not as severe as predicted, but we're making savings from the Newton changes that we've made, new ways of working, and we are exceeding expectations with regard to the Newton changes as well. I would also mention that we are in our intermediate care situation, mitigations are being worked at, and this is a pooled budget with the NHS, so it's a shared item. It's not something that we can do on our own, and those benefits of those mitigations should show up in next year's figures. The last thing I wanted to say is that although the figures look okay for this year, in fact better than perhaps we all expected, next year we've got the challenge of the living wage that's been now announced by the government and the employer national insurance increase, which is going to affect our providers, and as yet no mitigations or special case has been announced by the government to cover that off, and that was an extreme concern at the recent Registered Care Providers Association conference that I attended, and something that everybody was talking about with great fear and worry. And what will happen to us is, if no mitigations are put in place, they will be arguing hard for increases in the amounts we pay for our direct payments and for our all the work that they do for our care homes and so forth, and that will put a huge strain on our budget. So just kind of warning you about that. You all know about it, I'm sure, but I just wanted to put that in your mind before we go on to this month 6 report. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wakefield. Thanks, Chair. Chris Evans, Head of Finance Business Partnering. Hopefully you can hear me in the room. So yeah, this is the Q2 budget monitoring report for adults, and obviously now including housing as well. So I've included the slides online. I'm getting a bit of feedback, but I'll carry on. So corporately, there's currently an £8.47 million forecast underspend. There is a forecast overspending of 8.755 million in children's services, which is well documented, and also 3.213 million in climate and place. Large underspends elsewhere, and a £6 million contingency budget bring it back into the 8.479 million underspend. So from an adults and housing perspective, hopefully you can see the slide online. On a net budget of 246.152 million, there's a forecast underspend of 3.474 million. So that's about a 1.4% of the actual budget. So in summary, the commissioning team led by Paul have been working with the market to reduce residential and nursing fees. The links to international recruitment rather than costly agency staff. So the service are also seeing a reduction in residential care placements in line with our Promoting Independence Transformation Programme, as has been mentioned by Councillor Wakefield, and an increase in domiciliary care, supporting individuals to live in their homes, which is obviously what we all want. Mental health, so there's a reduced residential and nursing cost to budget and a corresponding increase in direct payments. daycare and transport, in line again with the promoting support at home. From a learning disabilities perspective, again, Councillor Wakefield's touched on this, but overall growth is less than anticipated. This is a pooled budget with the ICB. Commissioning, this is forecast to be a 3.199 million overspent, with pressure in intermediate care and the 25% of the learning disabilities pooled budget showing in this area. Moving on to housing, who's now led by Kirsty Larkins, who's also online. So overall, housing is forecasting a £22,000 overspend, which is pretty much on budget for the size of it. So there is a pressure in the housing options team in a number of cases, which the council has a responsibility to provide relief or main duty accommodation. And despite seeing an increase in demand on bed and breakfast accommodation, the service is trying to remove this as obviously a long-term option for families. And then on the final slide, you can see this is showing good news. So finally, so the medium-term financial plan savings tracker shows all of the savings have either been achieved or are on track, and that totals 13.7 million. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. So open to the committee members in the room. Do you have any questions for Chris or for Councillor Wakefield regarding the budget monitoring month 6? That's good then, isn't it? So I've on my notes to say I'm to sum up. I think it's challenging to sum up this really, but it seems to me that the underspend has to be put in context, and we need to be prepared for winter. But it's clear that things seem to be working, getting residents into their own home, being supported at home. So I think that we need to look at this, keep looking at this very closely, but it looks like we're heading in the right direction. But of course we have this big unknown with winter coming. Right. I think that I can't answer any more comments to that, but so we move on to, am I allowed? My discretion, yes. Councillor Briss.
Thank you for a comprehensive report. It's all in there. That's probably why we haven't got very many comments on it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Item 7, Somerset homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. I'm going to invite Mike Lehman, Kirsty Larkins and David Baxter to introduce this report. Thank you. Before that, I just want to invite Councillor Wakefield to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is that just to remind councillors that because of the cold weather at the moment, we've got our sweat policy in place. So we are offering beds to people who are rough sleeping. And if you know of anybody, if you see anybody, if there's anybody out there that you're worried about, tell them to get in touch with the council. We will find them somewhere. It does say on the website, places are limited. I think what that means is that if everybody did apply, which we hope they will, it would be a bit of a stretch. It would be difficult. But I think it also means get in early, because you're more likely to get placed quickly if you get in early. Now, obviously, hopefully last night people did, and hopefully that will move on. Just wanted to say that first. I also went to a very interesting meeting with the NHS earlier this year, in which the NHS have now made it absolutely clear that they regard a house, somewhere to live, as an essential human right. This is really important. It is. We all know it's an essential human right, but they understand and they get that people are going to become ill. They're going to use their services more if they have nowhere safe to live, and that's really important moving forwards. Me and my team have inherited this work from the team as it was under previous portfolio holder, but I'm very proud of the work they've done bringing forward this strategy. It's really important. We all need to look at it and think about it. You will see from the papers for this committee that there are some areas that are not quite completed, but it is due to come to executive, I think, in January, and it's absolutely crucial that we get this strategy in place and that we then implement the parts of it that we should implement in order to hopefully end rough sleeping by 2030. But I think the vision is to make sure that everybody has an option by 2030, because we know that not all rough sleepers will come in even when we want them to. Some people just like the lifestyle or have adapted to it, and they don't want to live in a community or in a provided place. But we want to have options for all of those people, and to work with them when they are in the community with us, so that they can hold on to their tenancies and remain in the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name's Mark Lehman, Strategic Housing Manager, joined by Dave Baxter on my right here. Just want to talk you through, got a few slides just to give you a bit of background to the work here. It's quite an involved and complex project preparation of this strategy. So just give you some context. It won't take too long, about 5 minutes or so, just talk through some slides. Okay, so first I'd say this strategy is a statutory requirement. We are obliged by law statute to review a homeless sleeper strategy every 5 years. Current one expires in March 2025. In Somerset, we've made a decision that the ownership and responsibility for preparing this homeless sleeper strategy rests with our Somerset Homelessness Reduction Board, which is a multi-agency partnership of all key players working around homelessness and sleeping across the county. We're asking the council to adopt strategy. It is the council's responsibility to adopt the strategy. We're not asking you or the council to adopt the action plan. There will be a quite a complex or detailed action plan supporting the strategy. That will rest with the HRB. The HRB will develop the action plan during the early part of next year. This slide shows the path to adoption. There's been a lot of data gathering, intelligence gathering, lots of consultation, lots of engagement. We had a meeting with the HRB on 29th of October. They've given in principle approval to the strategy as it's presented to you. So partners around this agenda are saying, give us a green light to go forward here. Following today, it will go to scrutiny 6th of January for hopefully adoption. Suggested focus for scrutiny is, I think, to certainly acknowledge the consultation feedback. I'll come on to that in a moment. We've had a significant response. It needs to be acknowledged. A quick look at the qualities impact assessment. To look at the vision, impact statement, principles and themes. We welcome your comment and support. And any interventions. I've mentioned the action plan rests with the HRB, but I'm sure you have ideas in terms of where you see interventions needed around sleeping. Quick look at the consultation feedback. So via Citizen Space, our consultation portal, we had 626 responses. That's huge. I'm not aware of any other local authority around the country that has such a big response to a homelessness and rough sleeper strategy. General public, 580 respondents. Interestingly, the majority of those respondents have some lived experience of homelessness or rough sleeping. So over 50% have some experience of what it's like to be homeless or to rough sleep. Full details are in the appendices, appendix 1, I think it is. In addition to that, we've worked, it's worth mentioning, we've worked very closely with Second Step, one of our providers. The Second Step provided floating support service for those in our supportive housing and for rough sleepers. They did some specific work with lived experience. So we had some direct conversations with 41 individuals. This slide here gives some background in terms of their circumstances, many in temporary accommodation. Asking questions around what would change your situation, what was the impact of homelessness on you? It's all negative. Questions around the impact of living in temporary accommodation. Don't like it, it's lonely, it's not suitable. But actually, some people surprisingly do actually, some positive experiences. I guess that context everything goes into it. If it's strengths or TA, some will have a positive experience of this. Looking back, what support would have helped you? Access to services, that's high, 40%. Nothing in some, the large majority of people. Mental health support, financial support, etc. We also spoke to outreach services. So we have a parliamentary award-winning nursing team working with Ross Sleepers and homeless people across the county, as well as government-funded Ross Sleeper initiative. Ross Sleeper teams principally based in the west and the east of the county. So lots of conversations with them, asking them about what's it like, what's it feel like out there. So lots of comments around differences of service provision across the county, bit of a postcode, lottery in some respects in terms of what service you might get, comments around more joined at work needed and social care, comments around culture, staff training, attitudes, opinions, lack of empathy came through, need to share data more effectively. And we also spoke to supported housing providers as well. So again, similar things here coming through from them. It's lack of appropriate accommodation, lack of appropriate support, inflexibility of services in some instances, concerns around prison leavers. That's been a big news item recently, hasn't it? More prison leavers, early release, revolving door of services, spinning around our systems, and issues around housing benefit. The slides are there. I mean, we could circle them off the meeting. A lot of this is in the appendices if you want more details. We did a lot of work around the equalities agenda. We've taken this very seriously. I think you'll see there's quite a large, extensive EIA attached to the report. What we found is that if you have a protected characteristic by reason of your ethnicity, by reason of your age, your gender, sexual orientation, your health, you will be overrepresented in homelessness and Ross Sleeper services. You will be disproportionately impacted compared to the majority of the population. So it's something we have to take very seriously, and we are doing so. So some comments there that we're pulling out from the consultation around equalities. I think one thing I've just focused on here is on the public side of things. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of comments saying a lot of positive comments in terms of actions and interventions, but also a feeling that displaced people, illegal migrants, are being treated differently to British nationals. They're getting preferential treatment. Get a lot of that feedback coming through. That is not the case. We're not doing that. We have government grants for these people, but they do not receive preferential treatment over British nationals. And I think that's something that needs to be flagged. It's something we need to address through our community safety work and through our comms as a council, as partners. But I think it just needs flagging. And because that was a comment that came through again and again and again. So this slide just says we've made some changes to the EIA. We produced a draft EIA when we did the consultation back in June, July. We've made various amendments to it. I won't go through what the amendments are, but they are listed here. So onto the content of the strategy. So a lot of background. I hope that's given you satisfaction is that we've built a lot of evidence around this to feed into this strategy. We have a vision, we have an impact statement. The vision is the vision of the Homeless Reduction Board. We think it's entirely appropriate to be the vision for the Homelessness and Sleeper strategy. Heavy emphasis on partnership working to resolve the problems here, ensuring people have access to secure and suitable housing and support, etc. So that's the vision. Impact statement. What's the impact that we're trying to achieve here with what we're doing around homelessness or sleeping? Well, we recognise that homelessness or sleeping should be prevented, and what does occur should be rare, brief, and non-recurring. That's the impact that we want to achieve with partners working in this area here. The evidence, the feedback, the consultation leads us to define 3 principles. One around the need to increase early help and prevention, one around the need to end Ross sleeping, and one around the need to provide suitable and affordable accommodation and support. Underpinning those are two cross-cutting themes. Again, this came out through the consultation, the voice of lived experience. So when we're planning our services, we make better decisions when we involve lived experience. We need to be talking to these people around their experiences, what it's like, the interaction with services, build it into all the work we're doing, and the HRB are onto this. There is an interesting work actually. The second thing is around improving health and well-being. It's critical that we improve access to health and well-being services for people that are suffering with whether you're rough sleeping or you're homeless. These circumstances, then it seriously impacts your mental health. It impacts your physical health, and access to services is essential. So they're undercutting things. Okay, the principles. Almost them on the PowerPoint. Just 2 or 3 slides to go. So early health and prevention. The statistics in Somerset around early health and prevention are not good. So when we compare ourselves with national figures or regional averages, we are poorly performing. We're not doing enough in this area to prevent homelessness or rough sleeping. So the first requirement we have on here is to actually get to grips with that, and I think we need to work with partners to build and promote protective factors for the whole population. So that's about linking through with communities. It's around working with employment sector. Well, it's one of the big missings in the HRB actually is employment representation. So it's working on that jobs and skills area. It's working with schools and colleges around to educate people around circumstances of homelessness. So there's more we can be doing there. We need to focus on targeting at-risk groups. If you're suffering domestic violence, if you're a prison leaver, etc., you are more at risk of homelessness. So we need to do more work targeting those vulnerable groups. If you're leaving hospital, you're vulnerable to homelessness, etc. More work in there. And the final thing is just to just generally to improve for those that are coming to us with homelessness concerns is to get on top of that prevention agenda when that first interaction with them. The second slide, I think Kirsty is going to just talk to this one, which is around ending rough sleeping. So Kirsty, if you want to jump in there.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, just quickly introduce myself to the committee because I know some of you won't know me. I'm Kirsty Larkins and I'm the Interim Service Director for Housing. So it's really good to be at the committee this morning, and I'm sure I'll be working closely with you over the coming months. So as Mark said, the second principle is around ending rough sleeping. We have really high numbers of rough sleepers in the county, and that may be a surprise to some of you, it may not to others, but for a sort of rural county, we do have a high number. And just sort of picking up from Sarah's comment about our cold weather provision, last night we accommodated around 40 rough sleepers in accommodation, but there are more out there, so please do signpost people to the services. So the principles around rough sleeping are obviously trying to end rough sleeping. Nobody makes that initial choice to go and sleep on the streets. It's normally out of desperation that people find themselves there. So we're working to prevent that homelessness and rough sleeping before it happens. So it's really about using data and targeting those people that we believe are at risk of rough sleeping, making sure the right support is in place to kind of prevent it escalating. Also, when we are aware of rough sleepers, making sure that we intervene quickly, it's responsive, it's effective. We have teams across the county doing outreach work with rough sleepers. And actually part of the process of bringing rough sleepers in cold weather is also to link with outreach workers so we can get our clients engaged with services. But it's also making sure we've got tailored wraparound support and being creative about what the accommodation solutions might be. So it's not straightforward. Some people will need their own front door without shared facilities. Other people prefer to be in a shared facility. There's a real mixture about what's needed, so it's definitely not a one size fits all. It's about flexibility and obviously working really closely with our colleagues in adults and in health, and across those sectors is important as well, and making sure, again, support can be flexed in and out to support rest sleeping, to end rest sleeping, and to make sure that people move on to sustain a tenancy and accommodation, whatever that might look like and whatever that good might be for them. I think I'm handing over to Dave now for the next slide.
Thank you. Just to draw your attention to the headline, suitable and affordable accommodation and support suggests that, and it's true, that the support is as important as the accommodation. But just starting with that accommodation, I mean, part of the ambition is obviously to work together with our landlord function, our housing development teams, to develop more affordable and supported housing to meet identified need, and also work with in partnership with our housing partners, the housing associations around the county. The need, usual things, more one-bed accommodation to meet housing register demand, the home finder sunset demand, and more social rent, particularly if we can deliver that. That's important because we are struggling with the private rented sector across the county. Shared accommodation in particular is an issue, and while the housing benefits system still includes shared accommodation rate for under 35s, they obviously want something they can afford, and there isn't enough of it. Pressures in Bridgewater, Bridgewater's Bridgewater and Taunton actually have probably got the biggest private rented sector market in the county. Shared accommodation in Bridgewater, according to Rightmove stats, which we look at on a monthly basis, has plummeted. It's just not out there anymore, although it still has the highest rents for shared accommodation in the county. You could blame Hinkley workers, influx of Hinkley workers on that. I do, particularly when I'm talking to EDF about negotiation on what we can do in mitigation. I think there's going to be displacement. I think the same thing is going to happen in Taunton. I think Hinkley workers are now finding it difficult as well, and there'll be displacement into Taunton. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to shared accommodation in Taunton. There's a fair bit of one-bed accommodation in Taunton. The shared accommodation again is coming at a premium. What's happening is this displacement, particularly we are looking at where we place displaced persons coming into the county. A lot of them are going over to Yeovil because there's shared accommodation in Yeovil. And interestingly, when we looked at statistics recently, some of that shared accommodation rent is higher in Yeovil than some of the one-bed rents. What that means for people on shared accommodation rate, I don't know. Whether they just price out the market, whether they can afford one bed in Yeovil, I'm not quite sure where we're going with that one. There's not a lot of shared accommodation in the east area. There's just not the large enough urban areas to support a robust private rented sector market. So we're having difficulties. I know that some members have sensitivities around houses in multiple occupation, things like car parking, some things like low level antisocial behaviour, things like leaving rubbish outside, etc. But I think it is a valuable low cost, in most cases, a source of accommodation, and I think we ought to encourage it with some sensitivity, obviously, and ensure that it is of a decent standard. We also want registered providers, partnerships, and the market to help us deliver supported housing to meet identified need. It was interesting, some of the consultation responses were saying we need more female-only provision, and victims of domestic abuse are quite high in our potential homeless stats. It's an interesting comment, though, because we have a commission service to provide this. So either we are underestimating need, or there is a lack of information on the accommodation and support that is available. Step down beds, out of hospital, move on accommodation from our YMCAs for young people, move on accommodation from our own temporary accommodation. We all need that. Rough sleepers, off the street accommodation, obviously, but also treatment centres for drug and alcohol. They've gone into drug and alcohol. And particularly needed in the West area, in and around Taunton, and more housing first accommodation in the North is required. Also high support beds, mental health, complex needs, supported accommodation. We need some intermediate move on for rough sleepers, and as Mark mentioned, prison leavers, supported accommodation for people on probation. Part of the answer will be to look at our corporate assets. So, for instance, I think I'm pointing in the right direction over there. We've got Milton House, the next nursing home, opposite Sainsbury's. We're looking at that. It's nursing homes. It's got accommodation already. It would probably turn into something temporary accommodation quite easily. How we use our extra care housing and some of our shelter schemes also could be repurposed quite easily. The rest of it, we're looking again to our housing association partners. The problem is that the supported housing market uncertainty over the last 5 years, a lot of them have pulled out of provision of supported sheltered housing. The gap is filled by private equity funded housing providers to a certain extent, but they come with greater risks around value for money and sustainability. But there's a need to re-stimulate the local markets, encouraging incentivise housing providers to deliver what the council and other people, working age adults with or without care support needs require. And that is what we will attempt to do through our action.
That was the final. Oh no, one more slide. Yeah, just to mention, I did mention the action plan. So we've got the strategy, there'll be an action plan supporting the strategy. As I mentioned, we'll be developing that in the new year through the HRB. Trying to get a sense of priorities. There's so much, as you can imagine, there's so much coming out of this in terms of what needs to happen here. Given shrinking resources, both across the council in our provider network and also nationally, what's coming down from government. With the best will in the world, we can't possibly do it all. So the HRB will have to get a sense of priorities in terms of what we can do, what the priorities are, having a hand on resources, capacity, and who's going to lead the various work streams. So that's a key piece of work for the HRB in the new year. And that was the final slide. Happy to thank myself, Kirsty, taking questions.
Thank you very much, and it's a substantial, incredible piece of work that you have put together as a team. So, as a committee, we have to consider and comment on the strategy and impact statement and the principles, and it's a statutory requirement to have this strategy, and we need to recommend this to exec. So I just want to say a couple of things before I hand it over to your questions, really, hopefully as a steer, useful steer, that it seems to me it's a bold and necessary vision and piece of work, and it does actually expose a mountain of challenges that reflect wider social economic issues in our unique county of Somerset, but it's dependent on many national policies. There are specific challenges to Somerset, and they list these, and there's things like the cost of living, low wage economy, aging demographics, poor social mobility, rurality, difficulty of accessing services, lack of availability of small housing units, which was mentioned, Hinkley. So this is what I mean. It's exposing all this really important stuff that's going on around us that Somerset Council needs to focus on. It's really stark that we have the sixth highest number of rough sleepers of any local authority. And only in front of us are Westminster, Camden, Bristol, Bournemouth, City of London. And Glastonbury has the highest density of vehicle dwellers per population in the UK, and the second highest by number behind Bristol. I represent Mendip South, just outside Glastonbury, and it's one of the highest level of concerns and contacts from local villagers and residents are about this growing problem. So there is an ask in the report. So I want you to consider, when you're thinking about your questions, about what you can offer in terms of feedback on the vision. That's what we've been asked to do. But also, can we support the ask? And the ask is, I'll just go to the page. Page 56. At the very top of the ask is ensure local authorities are adequately funded to meet local pressures and demand. If you connect that to the unique characteristics of Somerset that I listed, right? So that funding, so do we do anything about this ask? Can we do more than just comment on the strategy and say, yeah, that's a great strategy, we want that strategy to work? Previous strategies have failed. Previous national strategies have failed, although the comment in the report says at least there was a plan, at least there is a plan, there is a current plan with the current government. So yeah, just to mull that over, do we support this ask? Do we ask the exec, do we ask our lead member to help support the ask, to support this piece of work? But please give your comments and your feedback on the vision and the principles of what this strategy is looking to deliver. So the first person, Councillor Woods, over to you.
Thank you. Mine is very practical. If I've got aging people in my division, which I have, and they have got spare rooms, now it would be nice if they could offer those rooms for temporary accommodation. But the problem is, once you've got somebody in it, they have the right to stay at the moment. And we see this with other rented accommodation. So what can we do to open up those rooms that are there in our elderly homes, but they can't commit to the commitment of having somebody there all the time? Because you get ill, you need to have more accommodation perhaps for a carer, therefore you haven't got that spare bedroom anymore. Is there any way we can open up that area where you get the elderly being supported by the youngsters, but not completely, how do I put it, lumbered with them, right? Is there any way we can do that? And this actually is a practical one that I'm trying to solve in my division.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. What we're looking at is key worker accommodation in particular. So we're working with the NHS and social care on what is a housing hub for key workers. Part of that offer we are looking at is something called Home Match Home Share. And this is where a key worker, could be a health worker, could be social worker or whatever, is looking for accommodation. And elderly people or somebody with a care need are looking for companionship. What we're not expecting is for the NH worker to go in there and offer care. What they will be is offering companionship, which is somebody to talk to, somebody to make a cup of tea, or whatever the local household needs are, in return for a bed. There's a national scheme that's been running for a number of years. We're looking to put in our own Sunset Home Share scheme. Not yet off the ground. James Corley over at Adult Social Care, he's off at the moment, but he's back, I understand, around December time. He's leading on it. We are talking to our displaced person service as somebody that may be able to run the thing for us as well. So sometime in the new year, that hopefully will be available, and it's something that would particularly appeal to older people, I would have thought. So yes.
Thank you for the question. Any comments on the vision and anything you want to sort of steer on the vision, give feedback on the vision? That's what we've been asked to do today. And are we happy as a committee to recommend it to the exec? Over to Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. Firstly, I've picked up the same as you on the asks in there. I would imagine that's probably something that's going to come out of the action plan from the strategy. I'm not sure whether we're a bit premature because it's still in draft form, whether we might need to sort of wait until the strategy has been completed and then take that forward as a committee as an action part of the action plan, maybe. And the other thing I wanted to ask, I think there was already some all-member involvement in terms of a briefing about the strategy was a few months ago, August, I think. I would think it's probably a good idea. I don't know how close you are to completing this. It's still in draft stage at the moment. It's going to executive January, I think I understood. So I'd like to understand a bit more about the timeline when you're expecting to go, okay, the strategy is now ready to present, and how long have members got to input into that? Will there be another briefing for all members? Because I think maybe it's important that all members get some more briefing on this rather than just this committee. Thank you.
Who would like to answer that? Is that you? Is it Mark?
Mark, do you want me to come in or?
Thank you, Kirsty. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So unfortunately, we are on a tight timescale because at the moment we're not compliant, although the MHCLG has given us an extension. So it will need to be approved, hopefully approved in January by executive. But we have got a briefing set up for members of this committee, and we will intend to do some more widely with members regarding housing. So that will cover the strategy, but also cover other areas. The action plan doesn't need to be approved by the council, but I would again be very interested to have feedback from the committee once we have that plan. It will be developed by the Homeless Reduction Board and with our partners, because we realise that we can't do this alone as Somerset Council. Our key partners are important in helping us deliver those actions. But again, be very happy to share that with the committee once we've got a more detailed draft to share, but I don't think there'll be opportunity because of the way meetings fall to come back formally to a scrutiny committee and then make it to executive in January as well. But and the action plan will be iterative, so it's not going to be set in stone. So even whilst we're developing it with the board and there'll be a copy, there will still be opportunity to input into that. So we could do that after the actual strategy is approved. The key is around approving those themes and principles of the strategy. So hopefully that helps. I'm very keen to have scrutiny involved as we move forward and have been used to that way of working. So whilst we might not be able to do it sort of formally before January executive, we can certainly bring back information to the committee after that around the action plan and how we're progressing.
That answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Yeah.
Are the implications then on how we can support you in moving forward to delivering your action plan on the ask? Is there anything else we can do at this point? Can I ask Kirsty that question?
Yeah, so I don't think there is. I think the key for today is around the committee being in agreement with the principles or raising any queries you might have around the sort of principles and the themes of the strategy. once we've got a more detailed action plan, as I said, we can bring that back, and happy to share outside of the committee meetings as well for those members that have got an interest and inputs. There will be opportunity to input after this date to the action plan.
Thank you. Councillor Govia, you have a question? Or
Well, it's probably more of a comment and a question. I mean, yes, I think, you know, the strategy is good. I think, you know, and I think it's really important. The question relates to rough sleepers, and you know, I hate using anecdotes, but there was a person who was a rough sleeper in Wellington a number of years ago. Fortunately, he's now in local authority. He's got a local authority flat, but there was a reluctance of him, even during the time of COVID, to go to the service that were provided. You know, he would quite often say, "Oh, well, I don't want to go in there because it's full of druggies and, you know, people, alcoholics, that sort of thing." And he felt I think he'd broken out of that cycle and then didn't want to be put back into it. So I wonder if that's a challenge. And the second point I wanted to make was, I really think, you know, until we address the real problem, which to me is the housing supply side of it, then we're not really going to be able to crack them. We know we tinker at the edges, but and so often now I hear Wellington's had a huge amount of development put in around it over the last few years, but so often I hear that it's the affordable housing which takes a hit. For example, that one of the latest plans that's gone through with the building a road into what would be the railway station if that ever goes ahead, and because of that, there's no affordable housing being put on the site. And I think, you know, we've got to work with our planning colleagues to get the balance better, because if we don't, you know, we're putting up executive 4 and 5 bedroom houses which no one locally can afford, and we're not putting the social housing in there which people need. And I think, you know, until we crack that nut, you know, the strategy is good as far as it goes, but it's always going to be up against this massive hill. Thank you.
thank you. Who would like to respond?
Happy to come in if that's okay within the room.
Thank you, Kirsty.
So in answer to the first question, I think you're right. Many rough sleepers are reluctant to take up services, and that can be for a variety of reason, which is why we need to make sure the accommodation that's on offer is flexible. So some of that is around the housing first model. So that's where a rough sleeper has their own front door, and then we pull in support services, whether that be mental health, drug, alcohol, tenancy support around the rough sleepers, so they're not sharing accommodation with anybody else. So there's that flexibility needs to be brought into the plan to make sure we can kind of cater for the different needs of the client group. And you're absolutely right, housing supply is critical. Our enabling team do work very closely with planning colleagues, but the issue we have, as do all councils, is there are competing demands. So roads, education, health, housing are all competing for money from those developments or buildings from those developments, and that can be hard. There will be a further piece of work that we need to look at and agree corporately around what those priorities are, and make sure that affordable housing doesn't slip off the end of the agenda or the end of the sort of agreements. There is some more work for us to do across the board and kind of agree those priorities as a council.
Thank you. Oh, yes, you want to add a comment, do you, David?
Just to add a comment, if I could, Chair, thank you. Having the local plan development is going to be really important in this regard. And I think it's fair to say in the past, rarely has sufficient reference to housing needs of older people and other people with care support needs being addressed in the local plan. And the reason behind that is lack of evidence base. So the fact that we've had such a response to this is obviously going to help, and start that process is I'm going to communities meeting tomorrow, just to present the homeless strategy and the housing strategy generally, and the supported housing strategy, which is going to be important as well. So we are starting to make inroads with our local planning colleagues, and we have a more robust evidence base than we've ever had. We may need to add to it, but it's a good start.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that wants to comment on and give their feedback on the strategy and the vision and the principles? Councillor Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. This may be bit tangential, but I mean, in Shepton Mallet, within the last year, last 18 months, we've had an issue of, well, actually it was with the provision of Julian House, an agency who are taking on homeless people, working with the council. It has been controversial as a credit to Julian House and the council people that controversy has been abated. Was, however, not completely clear to me, and apologies if this is not what this is talking about, is what happens at the other end. These people have been through Julian House. What is the? I'm not aware of what the process is. Sorry, not necessarily Julian House, but for our role in making sure that people coming out of the other end, having been rescued, as it were, by Julian House, actually find something permanent, which is not homelessness, and they don't revert to old forms. Thank you.
Who would like to respond to this? Councillor Leather's question.
I'm happy to pick it up if that helps.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty.
Yes, so anyone that's been in supported accommodation, there's kind of several steps around moving on into sort of suitable, more long-term accommodation. One is through our housing register, which is Home Finders Somerset. Once people have successfully completed a period of time in supported housing, they get an additional banding status, which helps them then bid for social housing. Unfortunately, we don't have enough social housing, so that can be quite a long process, and one that we need to address, and that's part of the strategy, is about addressing that longer term supply of housing. It may be moving into private rented sector housing, it may be moving into shared housing, but again in the private sector. So there's a number of options, and the plan is always that people sort of successfully move on into alternative accommodation and they're not left going back onto the street or sofa surfing. So there are plans in place, and those agencies do work incredibly hard with the client and with our other partners to find suitable alternative accommodation once they're ready to move on.
That answer your question, Martin?
Thank you.
Do you want to follow up?
That's fine.
Councillor Pilston.
Thank you. One of the things that isn't within the papers anywhere here is what is known or is data gathered from probably a slightly growing area, which could be touring caravan parks that are allowing people to stay much longer. Technically, I believe that would be enforceable, but not very easy to do. But are we collecting data about those people that are kind of neither in one camp or another, but in their own camp? And what information, are there any sort of side strategies or anything like that come into play? Thanks.
There's a simple answer to that.
David, yeah.
Yeah, the simple answer to that, which is a planning matter. But there are licensable conditions as well, which is environmental health. I know that particularly around Hinckley, there's been a lot of temporary planning permissions, supposedly temporary planning permissions, which are now being renewed because Hinckley seems to be going on for forever and a day. So there is activity around it. Whether people in touring sites are getting under the radar, I don't know, to be honest, but it's quite possible. But we are, there are eyes being kept on through planning enforcement, as you mentioned, and through environmental health licensing on the issue, but I have no direct knowledge.
Thank you. Is it possible somewhere that data can start to be collected so that we've got a better idea? Because clearly, if these licenses keep being renewed, and then you never know, what may or may not transpire in the future. But we all know, I'm sure, of the odd little pocket here or there, and it may only be a couple of people here or there, but those couple of people here or there, or dozen, whatever, do add up, and they should be considered as part of this whole scheme. Although quite often they don't want to be part of the services, they don't want to, that they're similar to often van dwellers around Glastonbury, for example, but they're not within the figures. Thank you.
Anybody else in the room before we go online? We have, I think we've got 4 hands up, starting with councillor Leisham.
Thank you, Chair. Your guess, of course, that I'll be talking about Glastonbury and van dwellers. So I just want to ask, please, if we can make sure we feed in the monthly monitoring numbers of roadside and off-road. So the October number for roadside was 107 vans and caravans. The November count takes place tomorrow. There are, of course, other sites that are off-road. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. And some of those are council land as well as privately owned land. So if I could ask as well that some work is done to join up with the Town Deal project in Glastonbury, where the enabling project is trying really hard to deliver some off-road living. And also there's some work we're midway through on disposal of land to a community land trust. So there is a lot of good work going on. It's far from easy. The number that is in the report of 300 is the number that was quoted during the lockdowns. That was the highest number we saw, and that compared with the Bristol number of 600, with the Bristol population of about 500,000. So we were reporting at that time 300 people van dwelling in Glastonbury with a population of 9,000. So it was no surprise that it was of significant impact to residents, as well as far too many people not living in decent accommodation. So if I could just ask the Chair, please, that we make sure we include all of that work in the work. But I really welcome this report picking up everything right across Somerset. Thank you.
I'm glad you've raised Glastonbury and the areas around Glastonbury again. It's a daily pressing problem for so many people, and they just want to see something happen. Things are happening, because I've actually spent time with the police, and I know there's a lot of police time that goes into working with those staying in their accommodation in the lanes and in Glastonbury. But would you like to just respond, Mark, to Councillor Lisham's question?
Of course, yeah, just simply give some reassurance that yes, absolutely, that issue is being picked up. So with the emerging action plan, that is one of the activities that will be in the action plan. So yes, it is being picked up, and the data is being monitored, being fed in. I think actually, I mean, just on the, it is, I said, this is the HRB that will monitor and prepare the action plan. I actually think the county is, excuse me, is in a really good position at the moment. It's got all this data and intelligence coming together within a partnership that's actually committed to making a difference here. So I think you're going to, for the first time, you should have a really robust multi-agency action plan. Also a range of things here. So I think Somerset's in a good position. Of course, the caveat to that is a lot of this, as Councillor Sawyer mentioned, is impacted by national policy, national funding. So, but I think you're in a good position.
Thank you. We're in a good position. The sixth worst.
Chair, if I may come back, if I may, I'll send you a link to what the authorities did in 1751, when there were lots of encampments around Glastonbury. So please, everyone, acknowledge that this isn't something that's just happened in the last few years. Glastonbury has been a spiritual draw for centuries, not just decades. Thank you.
Lucy, Councillor Trimnall, have you got some comments to and questions, please?
Hi, yes, I have. So what I wanted to talk about was the fact that I was very pleased to see prevention mentioned a lot. We talk a lot about prevention of things, and it's important because if we can stop the flow of people into that, particularly the homelessness situation, then it's our way of beginning to end this as a problem for many people. But my question is, once you've identified people, for a start, you're only really able to identify people who are already in contact with some form of services that we offer. And what do we, how do you prevent somebody who can no longer stay in their home or wherever they are? How can you prevent that if we haven't got the accommodation to provide and we already have people on the streets? So that was one question I have. And I wondered what the sort of, I tried to sort of identify, but I didn't really find what is the cause of the high levels of homelessness in Somerset. Have we identified that to see whether there is something that we could be doing to mitigate any factors that are causing it? Because it seems an unlikely place when you've got the biggest cities, Manchester and Birmingham and even Bristol, that we have such a high, and I presume the numbers are proportionate rather than just raw numbers. So if somebody could explain that, that would be good. And also movement between counties and local authority areas, because we have in Yeovil, for example, I don't represent Yeovil, by the way, I'm in Canton and Bruton, but I do go to Yeovil a lot. And I recognise sort of certain people who seem to come on an almost seasonal basis. And so, where are people going outside of those times? And how do we prevent our work from actually pushing people just onto a different area? So, and armed forces as well. Do we have numbers of armed forces or veterans who are now homeless?
Thank you. Do you want to split those questions up, or do you want to have a go, Kirsty, on all of them? Or
I think I'll do the first bit, but I will hand over to Mark and Dave, who are much closer to the data than I am, is probably helpful if that's okay with them. So I think, and I also wanted to pick up on your comment about we only know about people already in contact. And that is true at the moment, but one of the pieces of work we're looking at is actually using data sets that are available to us as the council to start identifying those people before they even do get in touch with us. And that's sort of work in progress so that we can really be working upstream. So you might be identified people are behind with their council tax or have accessed other services, or applied for housing benefits. There might be a number of factors, and that data's layered, and then that gives us people that may be at risk of being homeless, so we can really get in early. We're not there yet, but that is sort of in train. With regarding to how do we prevent people from homelessness, it's done in a lot of different ways, and it requires quite creative thinking by officers, and it is a tough job. So I just want to reflect that it can be done in many ways. So sometimes we prevent people from being homeless by providing a deposit and rent in advance for them to move into suitable alternative accommodation. Sometimes it's the landlord has served notice because they are fed up with the state of the garden, or there might be hoarding issues, might be a number of issues. And that's where we can work with other agencies. So if it's hoarding, to look at how we work with the hoarder, and mental health to reduce that risk and worry to the landlord. Sometimes it's actually getting grass cut and trees dealt with. Before now, we've paid for air conditioning where we had only on a short-term basis, but where we had somebody in a building which was extremely hot and dangerous for smaller children. So we paid for mobile units until we could move that family into settled accommodation. That is much more suitable for the family than having to move into bed and breakfast accommodation. And it's also much more cost effective for the authority. So it's kind of a win-win basis, but it can be all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's people are living at home with mum and dad, and that relationships break down, and we might provide mediation to repair the relationship and to keep things stable for a longer period of time. May still result in a move, but it's a planned move rather than a crisis move of somebody arriving in the office with their belongings and unable to kind of move forward. So I hope that gives you a flavour, but there are many ways in which the team can prevent homelessness. I'll hand over to Mark and David around the kind of the stats question. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I mean, I would say yes. I mean, Somerset figures, it's down to the things like affordability, it's low wages compared to house prices, it's the Hinckley factor, it's rurality, it's the Glastonbury factor, as been mentioned. There's a whole range of unique circumstances in Somerset, which is adding to the numbers. I think on the prevention side of things, just to add to what Kirsty was saying, I think, excuse me, we need to do a bit more work upstream. So I think there's things we can do to prevent homelessness. Some of it is around staff training. It's around being trauma informed. It's around being person centered in your approach to working with people. It's about being autism and neurodivergence aware. It's around being aware that sometimes LGBTQ plus or ethnic minorities might struggle to access our service for a whole range of reasons. Maybe how open are we, not just ourselves, the council, but others, to actually engaging with these groups? It's around how we work with hospitals, it's around how we work with prisons, it's around how we work with care in terms of people leaving those institutions. So there's a whole range of things that we can do. It's about community networks, providing support. It's around doing more on hidden homelessness, which is a big factor. It's about sharing data. We get smarter on that through the transform system. So other agencies may be aware that people are struggling. Share that data. We can intervene and provide interventions. Around working with schools and colleges. It's around bringing, as I mentioned before, the employment sector into this. There's some really good examples of HR things around the country where you've got a really strong business presence and are doing work around supporting people on skills, employment, working with DWP on finance inclusion. There's more we can do here around the upstream prevention, get to people who start tipping over into where they can't afford their rent, they can't afford their mortgage. There's lots more that we can do, and I think that's the strength of the partnership. All the key players there that can rally around these agendas and define an action plan. The data, the armed forces, we do have figures. I haven't got them to hand, so sorry, I can't give you the numbers. Just to say, we do have some good services in Somerset, supported armed forces. We've got ARC and their accommodation on East Street. We've also got, and a lot of the charities supporting armed forces have money as well. So, they are, you know, we need to approach them if there's needs, there's demand. There are charities with money, and they are open to having conversations around how we can do further work around armed forces. So I think that's an open door where we can access some more money to support our armed force veterans who find themselves in difficult circumstances.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Lawrence, welcome. Do you want to ask some questions and give some views on the strategy and the vision?
It's just a comment, really. I just want to say thank you for the work that you've been doing and sharing with us as councillors, because it's so important that we do understand the situation. And for those that are working in the homeless area, it's a learning curve for councillors sometimes to fully understand the situation, what more we can do, what we'll be thinking of for the future, because obviously I can't say for sure, but I'm as fairly sure as I can be, there's nobody sleeping on Minehead Seafront at the moment, and it wouldn't want anybody to be sleeping on Minehead Seafront at the moment. So I do feel that because the meetings that we've been having with the homeless staff, and that is really coming together, that we have a fully understood what is needed, what we are looking to do for the future, and how we're going to fund that. Because, you know, it's a learning curve for a lot of us, and I think it's very important that we have these meetings where we can fully understand what plans are there for the future and how we're going to afford to do that. To do that work.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor for Curry Rival and Langport, so a rural area. And my apologies for not having risked the journey today, as all of you have. It's just stopped snowing in South Petherton, actually. I wanted to pick up on the affordable housing issue and affordable housing getting withdrawn from development proposals, which Councillor Govia raised, but actually, in a way, Councillor Trimnell's and Councillor Lawrence's points related to it. We've I'm just giving this as an example, and I'll say a bit more about why it's important in a minute, because this is a strategic issue, getting enough affordable housing. We've just had a parish, Jewish Episcopacy, against opposition, I have to say, from the parish council and locals. We've approved 100 houses, all affordable, on the edge of Jewish Episcopacy. So it is possible to get very big proposals, all provided by a registered housing provider. It does, I just wanted to warn colleagues, though, it does raise an issue with SIL, because initially it looked as though all the houses being affordable would mean there was no SIL payment. Councillor Wilkins and I negotiated with the officers to get to a situation where the parish council got its share of the SIL, because there's nothing to discourage parish councils more from allowing or encouraging affordable housing than finding out they're not going to get their SIL payment. And my central point I wanted to make is that we rural councillors, many of us are encouraging developments in villages, including affordable housing, but often against resistance in communities, not always from the parish council, but from individuals putting in objections. So I just wanted to encourage all councillors, particularly rural area ones, to put the county interest before the interest or pressure of a particular parish or division, and encourage developments in small communities. People often say, well, we haven't got a shop, we haven't got a pub, whatever. Well, if you get more people into a village, you're more likely to get a shop. I think that's the argument to use. And the local plan, of course, is key to all of this. And of course, the new government, they're laying down policies, but what they actually do in the end to modify the planning rules is going to make a big difference to this. Last point, I think the key worker scheme that has been referred to will be very welcome and helpful. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think that's all the questions and comments. So my job now is to sum up. I think you've done a good consultation. You've clearly got a good level of responses, and you seem to have targeted well and got those direct responses. And you're listening, because you've made that a key component of your strategy. Is the lived-in voices will be heard and at the forefront. And as I mentioned at the start of this agenda item, it's a bold and ambitious vision, but we have to bear in mind that this issue is growing, it's complex, and it does lift the lid on the housing crisis, planning, Hinkley Point C, mental health services, on Somerset's low-wage economy, demographics, rurality, and the poor social mobility experience in this county. Those are all in the report. I'm not just putting those together off the top of my head. The action plan is key, and pulling partners together to deliver that action plan, which you acknowledge. But we need those improvements. We badly need those improvements. We need them as soon as possible. And my concern is that it's good strategy. It's good to have a good strategy. It's good to have an action plan. We've seen failure nationally, and we need to see things change, and I think that the stats are pretty bleak. However, the committee asked my colleagues on the committee, are you happy to recommend the adoption of this strategy? Recommend that the exec approve it. That's what we're here today to do. So the Somerset Homeless and Rough Sleepers strategy, are we happy to put this forward to the exec to recommend it? and we are obviously very keen to hear how it's going and to have the member briefings as much as you can, because as I say, it's connected to so many other things that need to be addressed. This is a symptom of other things too. So yeah, we don't need to have a vote apparently, but if anybody doesn't want to, or they want to add anything else at this point, Hilary Bruce.
Thank you. I'm happy to support the strategy in its current form, but reiterate it does seem to be in draft form, so we're not going to, we can support it as it is at the moment, but it's not as it will be presented to executive, I'm assuming, because it still needs to be completed. So I don't know whether we can support it being approved by executive in a form that we haven't seen yet.
I can see Kirsty nodding. Yeah, that's correct, Kirsty. Is that? Just
Yeah.
Mark. Oh, sorry, Mark's just going to come in.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There will be some further tinkering to the strategy, but I think that there won't be any tinkering to the vision, the impact statement, the principles, or the cost-cutting things. So, and that's the key framework of the strategy. I think if the scrutiny is happy to say, we're happy with this, we're happy for executives to adopt that as your framework. I think it's just, the changes are just minor wording within some of the chapters. It's 99% there.
Thank you. I think happy is not the best word I can use, but it's a very, very good piece of work that you have all done. And yeah, you're right. You have to do it in stages. You need to get the buy-in. We have to go through these steps, and it needs to go to exec, and it's a statutory requirement. It's not really, we can't not do it really, or else that you won't be able to deliver and help our residents. So yeah, but we're just keen to keep tracking this, and I would definitely be at the exec to hear this go to the next step. Anybody else want to say anything? So yeah, nods. Thank you very much for coming today and doing this piece of work. We are going to have a 5-minute break because I know that Graham needs to go and it's important. He's here for the next item, but 5-minute break online, if that's okay. You can grab a coffee and a biscuit because that's what we're going to do. And then we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back. Thank you for your patience, those attending online. So we are at agenda item 8. This is our annual report of the Director of Public Health. And I'm going to invite Dr. Rachel Hanley, Kate Anderson and Laura McCrimmon to present.
Actually, it'll be me, Chair, first, if that's okay.
Yes.
As the new lead member for Public Health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Climate change.
Thank you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Graham Oakes. I'm the councillor for Yeovil East. I'm the lead member for Public Health, Environment and Climate Change, and a former vice chair of this Scrutiny Committee. It's great to be back. It's great not to have to sit where you're sitting. I've enjoyed the view. It's nicer from this side of the chamber. I've only been in the role a few weeks, and so getting my head around public health has been actually fascinating. I have to say that if you went out and asked the residents of Somerset about what Somerset Council does, I'd be surprised if you asked 100 people if more than one or two realised that. Sorry, I have another place. That we do. That's better. And that we do public health, and we do incredibly important work. Now, what we're talking about today, the report from the director, is around a national target to try and make the country smoke-free by 2030. It's a 10-year plan. We're halfway through it. Back in when they were writing this, it seemed like a really good idea, which is a brilliant idea, and that 2030 seemed a long way away. Now we know 2030 is very close indeed, and we have a lot to do. But I'm
particularly pleased. I was speaking with the officers earlier in the week, going through this report and asking questions around our smoking cessation policy. If this council achieved one thing, and only one thing at all, in the next 5 years, if it achieved the 5% reduction and the 5%, so technically a smoke-free Somerset, the effect on our economy and the effect on the health, the healthy lifespan of our residents and the health of particularly of our children and everything would be dramatic. And they should be dancing in the streets when that is achieved, because it would be one of the greatest achievements of public health, definitely in my lifetime, but beyond really. It's an incredible target. And I think Rachel's, who is a consultant part of our team, and Laura, who's a registrar in our team, are going to talk you through the report and outline how we're going to try and do something that at first sight seems impossible, but having spoken to these officers, I now believe that we will get there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oakes, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us. So yeah, I'm Rachel Handley, one of the consultants.
My name is Lauren Crimmon, I'm Public Health Registrar.
And Max, do you want me to share my screen? Oh, hold on a minute for technology. It's so nice being a meeting in real life. I'd forgotten about this part. Everyone can see that, great. And just apologies from Kate Anderson, who had an exact clash with this meeting, to talk to the Integrated Care Board about their role in supporting exactly the same thing. So you will see as we go through that it's a whole system effort that we're looking for. But yeah, she's our specialist in our team. So really why we wanted to come today was to get your thoughts on how we want to present this report. So we're very much in draft phase. And so hopefully most of our time can be looking at the recommendations that we've started to set out to get your input and other ideas on perhaps how you might be able to get involved in your ambitious targets that Councillor Oakes mentioned. So this is the timeline that we've got for progress on this report. We're going to take a draft to scrutiny to exec for the 6th of January. And so we would like to be able to share a draft with that sort of at the same time that we share that with exec, so that you can have kind of ongoing input. So I suppose it's not just today that this will come across your desk. This is our rough structure, and I think one of the challenges for us is a lot of people have heard about tobacco and smoking work before, and I think, on initial labelling, I think people sometimes switching people off, or you think we've achieved it already, and it's like the most exciting. And so really what we want to do with this report is make it relevant and interesting to everybody and in every sector of Somerset society. So ultimately we'd like it to be something really relevant for the public. And so as we go through these slides, if you could be thinking about how this framing and the way that we're talking about smoking lands, I'd be really grateful for your insights. So you want to talk about why do we need a call to action for a smoke-free Somerset? And why do people smoke? And how does smoking actually affect Somerset? And why is it different now than it has been before? So there's some very specific things happening in the national scene that mean that we've got an opportunity that we didn't have before. And then going down into slightly more detail on who is it that we need to support, and what's the evidence around what will actually help us to deliver this smoke-free ambition we want to give a flavour of some of the work that's happening already, but that indicates that we really do have a long way to go. And then finally, just looking at those recommendations for your comment. So, introduction. Everybody understands that smoking is harmful. Many even know that 2 out of 3 long-term smokers will die 10 years early if they don't quit. In the UK, smoking kills more people each year than the other preventable causes in this graph. So if you look at those bars, and so it's quite small, sorry, but there's smoking is at the top, and then high BMI, then alcohol use, then low physical activity, and then drug use. And so as a proportion of all of the things that kill people, smoking is shockingly high, actually. And I think it's because it affects so many different parts of an individual body. So not only is it the biggest preventable cause of death and disease, it's also the biggest contributor to the gap in health between the most affluent and least affluent communities, so health inequalities. Smoking actually makes up a half of the health inequalities that we see. So although the numbers of people smoking has gone down significantly in the last decade, in Somerset we still have over 60,000 people who smoke. And so in a made-up imaginary average village of 100 people, 12 of those people would be smokers, and actually 8 then of that 12 would die early as a result of smoking. So as Councillor Oakes has mentioned, we've set this national target of reaching just 5% of people smoking by 2030, which for Somerset means helping 45,000 people to stop in the next 5 years. So you'll see from the rest of the slides that we're going to have to do things really quite differently to what we've been doing before if we're going to meet that target. And sort of questions around what does it mean for us locally then to make the most of the national policy drivers. I'm just going to hand over to Laura for this.
The reason we feel that why people smoke is such an important question is because having that level of understanding about why someone does something means that what we were talking about earlier in terms of prevention, we can really understand the pathway to where they are now and what maybe needs to change along that pathway to stop people starting smoking, but also help those people who are continuing to smoke to understand why they're continuing to smoke and so what we can do to help them stop. We've also lived in a culture for a very long time, and I know that, you know, myself having worked as a clinician and so seeing it firsthand, but also from the evidence that we get, is that there's a blame culture that we have with people that smoke, and there's an understanding that people don't have the willpower to stop and that it's an individual problem and we should just tell them to stop and they should be able to just do that. But we know that that's not true, and I'm very grateful to Chris Whitty, our Chief Medical Officer, for starting to take a much stronger approach to understanding the role that the tobacco industry has played in perpetuating that messaging. And we have just relatively locally from Bath University a huge resource from their tobacco tactics to let us know just exactly how much they are feeding that messaging to us to perpetuate that message. We know that the tobacco industry targets people who are vulnerable. We know that it targets young people because they know that their cognitive ability to make sensible and reasoned decisions is very limited because their brains just aren't developed in that way. And so they are much more influenced by what they see around them, what looks cool, what their friends and their family are doing. And that catches them in this very vulnerable stage. And then obviously it moves on to a stronghold of nicotine addiction, which is then a very difficult addiction to break. We know that it's about as addictive as cocaine, but just extremely accessible. And so starting to move towards that understanding that a lot of people want to try and stop smoking, and that regularly it takes people about 30 attempts to stop smoking before they're actually successful for a prolonged period of time, means that we can move towards a more compassionate and less blameful approach and hopefully align people working within different parts of the council, different parts of the NHS to recognise that smoking is all of our problem, whether it's working in homelessness, whether it's working in social housing, anywhere. It's a problem for all of us. So I'll hand back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Laura. So what's the actual effects of smoking in Somerset? We sort of tried to split this up into two ways. So there's the effect on the individual that smokes. So we know that 700 people in Somerset die of smoking every year. But actually, that's a very small picture, because it's really the burden on people before they die that is very significant. So compared to a non-smoker, someone who smokes will be almost 3 times more likely to die early, losing 10 years, as we said. They'll have 33% more sickness absence from work. They're almost 3 times more likely to need adult social care support, and 10 years earlier. They'll see their GP more, be more likely to be admitted to hospital. They lose on average £2,488 a year. Obviously that varies quite a lot, but just on keeping up the addiction, they're more likely to be unemployed, and they also earn less money. So, when we then look at that at a population level, and again, apologies, it's quite small, but hopefully you've had a chance to look in the papers ahead of time. You can see in that bar that the biggest cost to Somerset from smoking is in lost productivity, but then there are also significant costs to adult social care and healthcare. But in total, it's £190 million. One of the things I find shocking, though, is there's this concept that you can put a quality value on life. So one quality adjusted life year, so someone living for a year in good health, has a certain monetary value put on it. And if you look at how much of life is lost in Somerset because of smoking, it's 348 million just from that kind of loss of life itself. So it's a huge problem. And I saw a statistic the other day, I think it's since 1971, across the UK, tobacco has killed 8 million people. So, we've been dealing with this problem for a long time and we're just not there yet. So this is just a quick summary. In 2019 was when the government announced its ambition for this 2030 smoke-free target of just 5% of the population smoking. And then they've backed this up. Also, there's this 5-year tobacco control plan that tries to say, well, what do we need to do differently? Who do we need to focus on? What about inequalities? What are these approaches that we could take in terms of tobacco control measures in policy, and also what would it look like to have smoke-free NHS? And sort of building on that, there's now the tobacco and vapes bill, which last time that we came to scrutiny was really brilliant to have kind of unilateral support for that. And I think a motion was put forward to exec on that consultation process for the tobacco and vape bill. And so we'll touch on that a little bit more later in terms of what we can do. But it sets the scene for us to be able to reach those 45,000 people. But the challenge is going to be, how do we do that locally? And we can't just let those changes roll out. If you look at that graph, that's split by deprivation. So the top vital line is people who are in the areas that have the highest deprivations in most disadvantaged communities. And if we just wait for things to happen, it's not going to be till about 2050 that those people get to a 5% only smoking in their population. And so it really shows us where we need to focus our efforts. If by that line in the middle for 2030, we want to get everybody below 5%. So this is just to show you the distribution of smoking. So the darker colours are for a higher smoking rate. So it really kind of maps quite closely, apart from in West Somerset, it maps quite closely against deprivation maps, and also higher pockets in more urban areas. But what we also know is that there are specific groups of people that have much higher smoking rates, and so they're the people that we really need to focus on. So pregnant smokers, although these people are not as high in terms of their smoking prevalence as the rest of the population, it's about 10%. there are obviously huge implications for that person that's pregnant and their child and their wider family. And so it's a really, really important priority for us. We know that although we've got a really good offer of support for people that works alongside the maternity service and follows people up throughout their whole pregnancy and beyond, and also works with young families, even now 50% of people that are offered that support don't want it. We also want to focus on children and young people. So partly that's to protect them from secondhand smoke. And I think back in the day, we had a lot more activity and awareness around, just don't smoke in a car with a child or somebody that's got asthma. But I think that's kind of gone off the boil a bit over time. So it needs a revamp, thinking about secondhand smoke and making places smoke free. So the tobacco and vape store will help with that, but there's lots of work we need to do locally. And then, of course, children and young people being targeted by tobacco companies now, particularly start vaping, is a huge problem for us. But we need to do lots of work to understand the best ways to support children and young people to not do that. We know that people who are unemployed or have routine and manual jobs have much higher rates of smoking. People that live with a mental health diagnosis also much higher, and it's as high as 80% if you are talking about people with serious mental illness who are inpatients in hospital with their mental health condition. We really want to focus on inclusion health groups, so people who are experiencing substance misuse, people who are homeless, as we've heard about the homeless reduction strategy. Smoking is part of the challenge in terms of people who are homeless having much worse health, but also they're much more likely to start smoking because of their very challenging social conditions, and it's much more difficult for them to stop. And people that live in social housing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because we've done some really interesting work in that group. And as we've said already, people that live in areas of deprivation. So that's kind of our challenge of who we need to reach. And so really for framing this report, it's trying to galvanise a whole system approach to thinking these are key people and we really don't want to let them down, and we don't want people to just be left to just carry on smoking because it's just so harmful. So what will help people to quit? Actually, we know that there's been quite a change in thinking, and so we've had very rigorous smoke-free services for a long time that are quite strict about their criteria. People need to definitely be ready to quit. They need to commit to this 12-week behavioural support therapy offer and nicotine replacement therapy. Actually, although that's the thing that has the strongest evidence base, which is what that infographic shows you, is you're much more likely to quit with behavioural support than if you just try on your own. But actually what we need to be is more relevant for people in their real life contexts. And so actually it's quite similar to some of the things that Mark was saying about how do you kind of really engage properly with people that are homeless. It's got to be for that person. So you want to be quite flexible and have that personal approach. Some of the things that are emerging now are, what about supporting people even before they're ready to quit? What about helping people just to cut down? What about the fact that actually across the system, what we can see, if it takes 30 times actually to quit, we need to have a very different approach to how frequently we're open to supporting people. We don't want to close our doors on them. And one of the other things is that we know that vaping, actually for people who are smoking, is one of the most effective tools to quit. But we also want an approach that doesn't then just swap somebody from one addiction to another, but that would be unethical. And so it's being able to support people kind of in a longer term, more holistic way for a gradual harm reduction, and anticipating that it is going to take a long time and they might go backwards and forwards over that journey. This is just a summary of some of our services at the moment. So we've got a service in the hospital that we work really closely with called Treating Tobacco Dependency, and they help inpatients by kind of having a very brief conversation about, have you thought about quitting, and then they'll put them onto nicotine replacement therapy, and then when they're discharged they refer them back to our main smoke-free service, which I mentioned is that kind of 12-week behavioural support, but they're really looking now at how they can tailor those offers to be a lot more flexible for people. And then I've mentioned about the fact that we've got an offer that goes alongside maternity services, so smoke-free families is that one. And we also want to increase self-quit options, because we know some people don't want to come into contact with the service at all. So the more different ways that we can come up with that are useful for people, the better. So I actually was very sneaky, and this one wasn't in your initial pack, so I do apologise for that. But as we're still drafting the report, so some of our thinking is sort of evolving as we go, and I really like this framing of the fact that you can have individual interventions for people, so like our service offers, but actually only about 4% of the smoking population are going to come through that offer. So a lot of the things that are really going to shift the dial on this sit outside of that. So whilst we want everybody to know that service is there and they can really help us to communicate that and signpost people to it, and as the service gets more flexible and has more offers, hopefully more people will come through it. But really it's what can we all do against these different layers? So what about things that we can do at an institutional level? So opportunities to create smoke-free environments, really clear, robust support offers to help workforces to quit smoking, including maybe even work time to go along with smoke-free. And then healthcare has a very specific role as an institution to help identify smokers who are patients, provide a really good support offer. Then at a whole community level, there are things that we can all do in terms of having very brief, non-judgmental conversations with people about stopping smoking and not being afraid to do that. And then especially thinking about how do we reach those people that I listed as our priority groups. We're going to really need support from across the board if we're going to be able to have conversations with those people. And then there's a policy level, I'll talk a little bit more about what the tobacco and vape bill is going to give us as levers, but then we need to think about how do we apply that. So we want to support and implement tobacco and vape bill, but also I think we've got a responsibility to commit to a local declaration around tobacco control. So this was just so that I wanted to mention a few things that are going to help us to expand what we do. So trading standards already do really brilliant work in sort of exposing illicit vapes. They've got brilliant case studies of going around with their sniffer dogs and finding illicit tobacco and vapes underneath shop floorboards and things. I know that they've been into a school and they sort of have somebody a bit like a spy going into a school and trying to buy a vape as an underage person, and they could from the corner shop by the school, you know, and sort of exposing these tactics, I guess, of partly the tobacco industry, but trying to put in more enforcement, and they're going to really need a lot of support to be able to. Our social housing project was with our behavioural science team, and they ran some focus groups with people that live in social housing. And I think this is so important as an approach to then actually go and sit with people and talk to them and ask them, well, why do you smoke? And what would help you to stop smoking? And we were really surprised because a lot of them didn't even know that our service existed. And I think sometimes you can just live in a little bubble and just assume everybody must know. And it's not until you really get out there and you think, oh, actually, we haven't served you well. There's a lot more that we could do. And some of the things that they talked about in terms of why they smoke. As an example, we had this one person saying that it was because of the cost of living crisis that she could afford food, and actually smoking was cheaper, and it was better to be a bit hungry, and then smoking makes you feel a bit less hungry than to try and eat but there not be enough food and also have your nicotine craving. So, you know, it really kind of sets the scene for a more holistic approach to how we support people. So here are our recommendations, but I don't know, Laura, if you wanted to talk a bit about the tobacco and vape bill, because I think that gives us quite a good setting.
So there's 5 5 key parts to the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, which is going to its second reading in Parliament on the 26th of November, so very soon. But the first part of it is just its overall target, which is to get the UK prevalence of smoking down to 5% by 2030. But also it's that smoke-free generation aspect of it, which is that any child born after the 1st of January 2009 should never legally be able to buy any tobacco or nicotine products, tobacco products, but some nicotine products in the UK. The second part of it is existing or expanding some of the existing legislation. We have legislation regarding indoor bans, but they're wanting to extend some of that to outdoor areas, not within hospitality or beaches, but around places like schools, around other hospital and healthcare settings, to protect people from secondhand smoke in some more populated but still outdoor areas. The third part is to ban advertising and sponsorship of all nicotine products. So that includes vapes and other nicotine products that are increasingly being sold and advertised now, like nicotine pouches. It also involves limiting the flavours and colours and making sure that there's no free distribution of these products and that they're not available in vending machines. I think that's really important as well to speak to some of the anxiety around vaping, because we have to be very clear that people who have never smoked should also never vape. And we want to be very, very clear on that. So there's no need for anyone to be able to access a vaping product in a way that is more accessible than regular cigarettes. Because people who smoke know how to access their cigarettes, and so they know how to access vapes if they need them as part of their journey to quit. And we know that this 75% of the UK population back that particular part of the bill. The fourth part of it is licensing schemes for retailers of tobacco and nicotine products, so we know exactly who is and is not allowed to sell these products. And then the last part, as Rachel was speaking to, was to strengthen the enforcement around making sure that only licensed retailers are selling these products. So there would be £200 fixed penalty notices for underage sale of nicotine products and £2,500 fixed penalty notices for offences related to licensing. And in many cases, those are on-the-spot fines where it's appropriate to give them, and they would never have any need to go to court. So those are the 5 main parts of the bill at a national level. But of course, as Rachel has spoken to, there's the national bill, and then there's actually making that happen at a local level. And so what does that mean for us here? And I think as going back to that original part of the why do people smoke, for all of us in Somerset, it's understanding that smoking is not a choice. It's not something that they choose to start. It's something that generally is fed to them over time. They keep going because it's an addiction, and therefore we need to really support people in being able to stop and to have a more compassionate approach to caring for these people, recognizing that it's going to take a long time to help them smoke, and that we can continue to have that compassion a long way down the road, even when it's try 29 at stopping. And of course, respecting that even though there is not a lot of choice in starting, and it can be difficult to stop, but there is a choice in stopping, and we need to help support that as much as possible. So we also spoke about those very brief conversations that people can have, and that's intervention which has been looked at with critical eyes and is found to be really effective. Just very simple conversations by people being caring and saying, have you considered stopping smoking? And that can just trigger a quit attempt and getting them on their way to their overall stop. We also need to support a Somerset-wide action plan with a clear direction on how we achieve smoke-free Somerset by 2030, including stopping people from starting to smoke and protecting people from second-hand smoke. As Rachel has spoken about, we need to work with specific inclusion groups. So there are people who aren't routinely knowing about our services, that we don't routinely come into contact with, and a lot of those people are the people who have the highest prevalence of smoking within their communities. So we need to have better ways of reaching those populations and helping support them. And then all of us can work to support trading standards to enforce the new tobacco and vaping legislation once it comes in. And then with regard to health and social care and education, it would be very helpful for us to have place-based smoke-free support that's aligned to primary care networks and targets groups with the highest smoking rates spoken about, to support schools to embed a whole school policy for smoking and vaping. One thing that we have found is that we feel that this UK government bill coming in is going to be really helpful with regard to vaping, particularly in schools, because as we've said, children don't have the reasoning capacity to know that it's not a good idea to start. And so changing the environments that they're in is going to be the most effective way of stopping children from not starting smoking or vaping. We need to have stop smoking services that are further developed at hospital sites, so 100% of patients are asked if they smoke and offered support to stop. And we need 100% of pregnant women and partners being screened using carbon monoxide monitors at booking and throughout their pregnancy and provided with appropriate support, not only during their pregnancy, but as we had the pleasure of talking to Councillor Oakes about, but after they finish, after their pregnancy is over and once they start their parenthood, to help make sure that they don't start smoking again once the pregnancy is over. Which also has its intergenerational effect in stopping those children being exposed to secondhand smoke. In terms of employers, politicians and system leaders, we'd like the Somerset Board and constituent organisations to revise the commitment to a local declaration on tobacco control, including a commitment to not work with tobacco companies. As we've touched on throughout the presentation, it is quite striking how pervasive a lot of lobbying work done by the tobacco industry can be, and so just being aware of that and making a commitment to recognise that and not work alongside these companies is really helpful. Also, we would like a new Somerset-wide revitalised action plan to be put in place to achieve a smoke-free Somerset by 2030, to provide the right support to adequate to trading standards to enforce the pending new tobacco and vaping legislation, because that will be a lot of work. We'd like public sector organisations in Somerset to lead the way in workplace standards for smoke-free policies and support for employees to quit. So these inclusion groups that we've spoken to, this is where we really have to focus, because people in these communities are at the highest risk of facing very long-term health inequalities because of the high prevalence of smoking. But we also know that the majority of smokers don't exist within those groups. So we also have to make sure that the regular places that we see people in regular workplaces also have comprehensive policies and support in place to support smokers everywhere, where they live, work and play. And we'd also like support from local workforces to develop smoke-free policies that adhere to smoke-free legislation and provide the right kind of support for staff to stop.
Thanks, Laura. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the things we think will be useful to put in the report so that people can see the issue that tobacco is for us and the challenge ahead of us. And these are kind of suggestions for how we think we might achieve that target. But yeah, really welcome any thoughts and questions and suggestions.
If I can just finish up, if that's okay, Chair. I think the way I'd like members to think about this is not a reaction to a government target. This is not a reaction to something some people in London think we should do. This is an evidence-based report looking at real problems and real challenges, but looking for new approaches to solving those challenges rather than telling people, finding out why it is they make the decision. Why would somebody give up smoking for 9 months because they're pregnant and then once the baby's born, take up smoking again? You know, we need to understand that and we need to support people. If a child is born into a family where both parents smoke, it is likely their children will smoke and their grandchildren will smoke. So if you break that cycle, we have that opportunity now. If we break that cycle, it could be helping people for many years to come, and it will change our society for the better. In health terms, I know I go on as a nurse, but in health terms, this is a no-brainer. We really have to do it. And whilst I would not, strangely, have been so supportive 20 years ago, because it would have been slightly knocking your head against a brick wall, because of the work that's already been done, there is an opportunity to get it down to the 5% level. It is there, but only if we totally commit, work with our partners, obviously in health, but also across the economy of Somerset, explaining to every employer that they have a social duty and a personal care duty to their staff to help them to quit as well. And every person who quits,
it has a positive effect down the line. We often think about people and how a negative action has an effect on our society. In this situation, if you look at it the other way, everyone who quits helps make our county a better place for all of us to live. So please challenge, that is your job. Please challenge this report. But hopefully once you've challenged it, you will then wholeheartedly support it, because it is one of the most important things Somerset Council will do in the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. Another great piece of work. Feel very privileged to be chairing for this and the last item. I'm thinking to myself, why haven't we had this conversation before in this way? Is that because it's not presented like you've presented it, or I'm just that I happen to be sitting here and I happen to be a councillor? Because it just feels so much more broad and open to what is really going on. I don't think we talk about it enough. You want us as a committee to understand the scope of your report and your call to action for a smoke-free Somerset. I think, you know, me feeding back first, that's very, very clear. It's very ambitious, and it's very clear why, which I think is really important. But you also unpick the how. And I think that essential additional slide you put in, because I don't think it's not one size fits all. Is it? It's for us to be giving feedback on framing the messages. That is really the gold dust of what you need to do. And I did a little bit of my own research with a 16-year-old who is socially smoking, who says they're not a smoker, but they socially smoke. And I started to read some of your slides. You haven't created them for that audience, but this person was totally turned off, walked away, and was turned off by being told what to do, being told how bad it is and the consequences of it. So for me, young people, it's not to start, is how to stop that. And I can remember when I was young, and I didn't become a smoker because it wasn't cool. Today it is cool, I think, to smoke and to vape, and it's that challenge of changing that environment and the culture around a younger generation. That it's not cool. I was just thinking, if that particular young person was listening to you two talking, it would have had, because you're like role models, and so younger people talking to younger people really helps get that message across. But it's quite close to home at the moment, this conversation. So I'm really glad you're doing this piece of work. I really understand it now. So my question is, has the tobacco industry been asked to give money to Somerset to go contribute towards the NHS, the cost to our NHS? Because you detail that, don't you? You say how much it costs Somerset. Do we ask the tobacco companies to contribute the money, the effect of their products on our population?
It's an excellent question, and to my knowledge, no, and we don't. But our conversations about it kind of comes from thinking about the changes around climate change and looking at what the polluter pays kinds of concepts. And I suppose at the moment it's the taxation around tobacco and nicotine products, which are trying, deter people from accessing them. So that's sort of a barrier to the tobacco industry, and that tax is there. But it is an excellent question, and there are conversations about what could that look like.
Thank you very much. So my quick follow-up is, can we ask them? But I think I think we should ask them to pay. Right, so over to my colleagues on the committee, and first hand up, Councillor Bruce.
Thank you. Great report, and it's great to see this coming forward, and the bill. I think it's really positive. I think there are a couple of points really. One, I was pleased to hear you mention verbally the connection with food. I know people personally who've smoked for years and years and won't give up because they're worried that then they're going to go on and eat too much, and they have a problematic relationship with food, and smoking is a bit of a kind of a crutch, both if you can't afford food and also if you have a problem with food itself. So I think the connection there is quite important. And that kind of links in with what you also said about being surprised that some people don't know about our services and what's available. And if people are already in connection with the council for various reasons or different services, whether they're unemployed or social services, they tend to find out about the services because they'll be signposted by that professional they're in contact with already. I'm really keen that workplaces are really involved in this. That's great because I think they will have contact with people that might not ordinarily be in contact with council services. So I think that's really important. But also places like the food pantries, for example, where people are going to who are in that situation of food poverty. It's a great place to contact people and talk to them. And also picking up on something that the chair said about young people talking to other young people, and in the same as other different groups as well, that peer, and I wonder whether you do have any plans for having like champions of people who have used the support services, who could act as champions and go in and speak to these people on a peer-to-peer basis. Is that already in progress? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rees. A brilliant point. Trying to remember them. I think on your last one about the peer-to-peer support, we do actually have really good kind of case studies as well from younger people who have managed to quit through our support services, but they're often very reluctant to share those. So at the moment we haven't even got those stories to put in the report, and so it's I think it's that challenge around the coolness of smoking to then become a person who tries to help people to stop. And within your peer circle, it's quite a lot of pressure to put on young people. But I think it's as we shift the dial on those cultural norms, so the things with it becoming less acceptable through the worker trading standards, we think we'll have more opportunities. And Bridgewater College have done a really good piece of work asking their young people why they're vaping. And they found that a lot of them are vaping because they think it will help with their anxiety and their stress. And so then those young people are in a context where they're talking about that together and realizing that, oh, actually, this isn't really going to help our anxiety and our stress. And actually then Bridgewater College has been putting on mindfulness sessions on to help them manage their stress in a different way. So, I think there are lots of good things emerging. But nothing kind of formulated across the board yet. And so that could be something, I think, within a kind of a whole system action plan. What tools can we use that will support young people? What sorts of peer support? And food pantries is a brilliant idea, and I think that's exactly the sort of thing we'd really appreciate your insight on. Is where are the places that we could go and be putting this out there so that we're in touch with more people.
Thank you. A comment that came my way was for the year, people born the year before the cut-off point was almost a challenge to say, we're the last year. You've heard that? Yeah, you're nodding. Yeah, we're the last year that can do it, so we're going to do it. So it's like so many of these messages, if people are told in that, presented in that way, there's a so it's counterproductive and there's a defiance. So Councillor Bailey, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for an excellent presentation. Councillor Martock. Just a couple of questions to start with. What's the direction of travel currently in Somerset? So that if we did nothing, where would we end up? Try to pick the figure up, the 45,000 reduction, which on your figure should leave us with 15,000. But what's the current direction of travel? Is it up, down, or just staying the same? That's the first question. Perhaps I'll give you them all. The second one is, what is the effect of vaping? Because one understands that that's increasing dramatically, and introducing, and the way it introduces people into smoking as well. And the third one is really in terms of the tactics you might apply. bearing in mind that resources are always tight in every area that we're talking about nowadays, it seems, then should one look at focusing on particular areas? Like, I use this as an example, not exactly to say this is what you should do, like just the deprived areas, the areas where, in fact, in other words, go for the low-hanging fruit, the more difficult fruit, as we said, but the ones that basically, where the large numbers of smokers are, and focus on that rather than going for the whole of Somerset. So there are 3 questions there: one about the travel, one about the vaping, and one about the targeting of the campaign.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Yeah, direction of travel, I think Somerset more or less follows along with the England average. Actually, so our 12.6% of the adult population, it will very slowly go down, but in terms of us reaching that target for our population, it would be around 2050, and so it would take that long for us to get that 45,000 if we didn't change what we were doing. So that's on the basis that at the moment we see about, I think it's 2,000 people a year come through our smoke-free services, and then about 60% of those quit successfully as a result. So, I haven't done the exact maths on it, but it's a good question and something I think we should put in the report almost to show you what's the trajectory if we don't do anything in terms of numbers, and then actually this is how we need to try and tackle it. In terms of vaping, I think our stance in Somerset is more conservative actually than a lot of areas. So what we know is it's at least 20 times less harmful than smoking cigarettes. And I think lots of people think that it's the nicotine itself that causes the kind of physical harm, but nicotine isn't that harmful. It's the other things in a cigarette that make smoking so bad for you. And so that's why that very clear message about if you smoke, please switch from smoking, because that will give you those physical benefits. But actually, the effects of vaping, there will be some side effects there. And I think if you talk to people who vape, some of the things that they say are that it almost drives them mad, because it's a different kind of addiction, and it's different from just smoking a cigarette, where then it's sort of you get that hit and it's done. You'll see people, constantly needing to vape all the time, and you never really quite get the same. And so that, that's almost like a tormenting. So physically much less bad for you, but mentally terrible. It's still a real addiction, that nicotine, and it's still going to cost you money. And so ultimately, we don't want people to be staying on vapes at all, and we wouldn't advocate for them at all, as Laura was highlighting, because they're still being driven by the same industries actually. So, and your question about tactics is a really good one, and I think it's often this challenge in public health is you want to provide a universal offer, because as Laura mentioned, most people that smoke are actually kind of like in our average population. So where will we get those people? Slowly those policies are going to make smoking more difficult, and so that will hopefully encourage some people to stop. And workplaces are a really good opportunity for that majority of people. So that's part of that universal tactic. But we can't just do that, because unless we really focus on those, I suppose sometimes called harder to reach, but that's not a fair thing to say. It's just our services are not set up for those people. So our priority groups, if we don't make concerted effort to be relevant and real and present where they are, then we'll see that gap in health inequalities widen. So they'll kind of be left behind with the burden of smoking, whilst as a kind of average population, we're all quitting. So we need to do both in terms of tactics.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thurstone.
Thank you. Couple of points. The first one is on chapter 1, actually, in the very first line. You talk of advertising. Now, we know that the rules on advertising and sponsorship and all of that to do with the tobacco industry has massively declined to well, I would say, you know, zero. I very, very rarely see any advertising within tobacco products. I presume now that vaping products are becoming the new advertising. And I also presume that new smokers are more likely than not, I would suggest, especially younger people, come from vaping and then need to smoke more. And then and then into you know, crossing over into actual cigarettes, and because they're maybe more easily accessible, the rules on vaping may change, or both. The other one I would suggest is that it's more often than not familial. So when you mention advertising, I presume that you're looking at the sadness of the rising vapes, which I see as a negative, although useful for quitting. Fundamentally, you're just replacing one with another addiction. So that's one thing. And the other thing that you've not mentioned at all in, I think it's at part 5, chapter 4, and that's dental. So there's no mention of the harm that's done to mouth, gums, I mean, I don't want to go into tongue and throat cancers and things like that because it's a bit grim. But to your teeth and gums, it's huge. And I presume some of that is due to the fact that the dental industry is so fragmented in trying to get data together to work out, you know, the differences between visitations from people and not, as the case may be at the moment. But I was just wondering why, you know, how bad it is for your mouth and your teeth and why that isn't mentioned, especially given the heightened risk of not being able to do anything about it these days. Thank you.
Excellent. I don't know, Laura, if you want to comment on chapter 1 about advertising and vaping.
So with regard to advertising, definitely, I mean, there's been a ban on tobacco products. So the ban is more for the nicotine products. And certainly any little shop that I walk past, I can see posters, very colourful vapes all over the shop windows and on the backs of buses, particularly now for nicotine patches available really cheaply. Though that kind of advertising is on the rise. So that kind of advertising is what's being targeted. I think when we talk about the way that young people access advertising for vaping, or not particularly vaping, but vaping and nicotine products, it's not through maybe those more constructive posters and things on the back of buses, but on social media and product placement and influencers. And that's going to be a real challenge. And one that is just going to be exceptionally difficult to deal with and will be very difficult to legislate for. But what it can do is mean that, because we know that in communities where there are people living in less affluent areas and there are generally a higher preponderance of smokers, if you walk around and look at the shops, all of them have those posters on the door. So if you're someone who's walking around and trying to quit, the number of times that you walk past and have a trigger to see something that would make you think, oh, actually, I would quite like that, is much higher. So tackling those adverts is a good place to start, but we certainly do face the challenge of being able to legislate for nicotine products on things like social media, where the advertising and product placement is a bit more insidious.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then your next sort of that question of, do people move from vaping to smoking? Is that sort of
especially I would suggest more the younger people, because obviously older people are likely to have been smokers, move to vaping, and then flick between the two, you know, in their attempts to give up. But initially getting into smoking via the gateway vape. Thanks.
Yeah, so at the moment, I think, especially for young people, the data is very difficult because, of course, it's not legal for young people to smoke or vape. So, you know, you're trying to use it. We've got some kind of school surveys that give us a bit of an indication as to what's going on. And what they show is that young people in their kind of experimental phase are trying vaping. in the same way as historically young people would try smoking. But it doesn't look like they necessarily go on to smoke. But what we're not sure about is whether they then continue vaping. And we think probably they do. I think the kind of dual use issue, though, comes up over and over again with people who are smokers, and then they think that they'll be able to cut down on their smoking because they've started vaping, and then they just end up on both. And I think then that's a real plug for getting, proper, support through a service to help you to manage that, because that's a real risk then for people. But yeah, we haven't got the evidence yet that suggests that kind of gateway of vaping into cigarettes. And I would say vapes are so accessible compared to kind of tobacco products that's a helpful thing, but we don't see that. And your final point about dentistry, I think, is a really brilliant one. And then we do have a really good opportunity actually through the primary care commissioning group, which is where Kate is this morning, to look at what does health in a more holistic way do in terms of taking this seriously, and so what would that mean in terms of community pharmacists who might be really well placed to have those brief advice conversations. Dental services are, we haven't written anything on it, but I think that's a really good thing to include. So we'll see if we can get some statements from them. Thank you.
I have a quick follow-up question that's popped up. Currently, I know that within the proposed legislation, they're looking at licensing. Are vape shops currently licensed? Do they have to go through the license process?
A little bit murky on the licensing, actually.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. And if they are, I think it's just very easy to get licensing. So what I know is that licensing part of the bill is to make that much, much more difficult, so that you won't be seeing vape shops popping up everywhere.
Like, just a little bit down from a school, like it's just happened near me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the time, and we do want to get all the agenda items in, and I really don't want to overrun. There are people that have got to go that want to hear all items. So online, is it possible to, if you've got more than one question and you want a longer response, we can arrange for it to be emailed to you, but is it okay to be brief? I'm sorry to put you in that position, but I do want to get through every item before one. We've just had very meaty agenda items today. So I'll go to Lucy first. Thanks, Lucy, for complying in advance to my plea to be quick with questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm always quick with questions because I'm keen to get a move on. I wanted to ask about this new pill that's just been released on the NHS, I presume licensed for use for quitting smoking, and whether that will be rolled out across all of the NHS or whether there's going to be a sort of a disparity between different regions, because obviously that's going to be a huge help towards meeting this goal.
And yeah, the process basically is that we managed to sign off an agreement for pharmacies to be able to prescribe that. Is it varenicline that you're talking about, or that there are a few different pills actually that are coming through, but essentially we're almost ready to go live with them, and it's because we're really keen that we don't have some sort of postcode lottery on who's able to access those. There's a piece of work going on at the moment with pharmacies to make sure that they all are on board. And what we also are doing are using it as an opportunity to make sure that they can also provide very brief advice about stopping smoking to people, so that they get on board with our wider mission, but also can prescribe that pill.
Thank you very much. Christine?
Yes, just quickly. I thought that smoking on TV wasn't allowed anymore, but seemingly I'm wrong, because I noticed a few nights ago there was somebody putting a cigarette in their mouth, and I thought that had all been stopped, because that's such a bad thing for young people to be watching.
Also a very good point. And I know that the new bill is cracking down more on both the tobacco and the vapes, but I can go away and get a bit more information about exactly what the rules are, and whether some of it's more around like watershed moments like they have with sort of advertising different fast foods, or if it's meant to be a blanket ban. So I'll bring that back to you all.
Yes, good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel that unless anybody says differently, that we hopefully have contributed to the conversation, given you some ideas, and asked some, I felt, good questions. For me, to sum up, to not do the same thing with this campaign, and expect a different result. It's come across, and that is multi-layered what you have to do, and nuanced, and it's potentially new approach. Can we keep the conversation going with you, and can we work a time for you to come back and let us know how you're doing? I think with something like this, there's never a determined specific amounts of time for you. Oh, let's leave it a year. Let's leave it. I think any time you can come in is actually really useful so that we can help. We can engage our communities. If you give us the tools, we can see what we can do. So, thank you very much. I'll move on. And thank you for your help this morning with setting up the room, Rachel, particularly. Thank you. And we'll move on to our last item, which we're going to try and do in 15 minutes. And I've just got to give a notice, thank you, Graham, a notice to say that although the main report for this item is not confidential, there's an Appendix B that is, and if we do want to discuss Appendix B, am I allowed to say the nature of Appendix B? It's the actual tenders from companies, and we can't talk about that publicly because of the commercially sensitive information. So if people do want to discuss that, and I believe that's in the room, isn't it? It wouldn't be online.
No, we can do it online, but we'd have to make sure that anyone online.
Yeah. So we'd have to close the meeting, but I'm not going to rush that if people do want to talk about the confidential element of it. But could people email? Thank you, John. Could people email questions on that as well if they want to think about the
It's over to the office.
Yeah.
Happy to take email questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I haven't seen a reaction that we want to delve into the confidential tender details of the businesses. So I'm going to invite Stephen, Miles, and just Stephen, is it? Yeah, just Stephen. There's no Sally, to present item. Is that enough time for you? 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
It should be fine. I've got a short presentation
Yes.
just to summarise where we are.
That'd be great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Stephen Miles. I'm an acting strategic commissioning manager, and I'm joined online by my colleague Sally Plutt, who led on the commissioning of the recommissioning of extra care housing. So we last came and presented around extra care housing back in July, and that was just before we went to tender to get feedback before that tender process started. And this update is on what's happened since then, and the recommendations that will be going to the executive around the outcome of that tender process. So just to recap what extra care is. So extra care is essentially a service where housing and care are provided together in arrangement between the council, contracted providers, and social landlords. And what we're talking about in terms of this recommissioning process is the care element. We're not talking about the landlord element, which is something that if we were looking at developing new schemes or changing existing schemes, that would be something that would be a much more long-term piece of work, given that probably from initial thinking about it through to planning and build, you're talking 3 years minimum. So tenants pay rent, social landlord, and responsible for all their bills. All tenancies are agreed through a process that involves the care and support provider, the landlord, and the council to make sure that person is right for extra care housing. And there are care and support staff on site 24/7 to provide shared care to all tenants, and those who've got an assessed need under the Care Act will receive an individual package in addition to that. There's currently 14 schemes in Somerset, with a total of 504 tenancies between them. And the contracts end on the 31st of March next year, and therefore this recommission has been around looking at the way things currently work, looking at how we can improve it, looking at other changes around how extra care works, and then undertaking a procurement exercise based on the outcome of that. And that was some things I briefed you on when we last presented to yourselves. So in terms of where it sits, extra care sits in the kind of continuum of care and support. At the far left end, you've got people living in their own properties with minimal or no support or some home care going in, through to nursing care at the extreme right, which is the upper end of the kind of care provision we look at. And extra care sits in the middle, so it's for people who need support around, have care and support needs, but where we're doing our best to try and keep them living as independently as possible in the community and not having to step up to residential care or nursing care. So in terms of the desired outcome from the recommission, that's been to reduce the council's relative use of residential care during the lifetime of the contract. I say relative use because we know that with the way the demographics of Somerset, there is usually a link between the demographic and the use of residential care. And what it is about reducing the steepness of that curve of increase of that type of service, rather than saying we would stop using residential care and use extra care in the entirety. That's not what we're saying. So in terms of a progress update, since I last updated the committee in July, at the time I presented we were in the process of undertaking a survey with staff who provide extra care, the support care and support in extra care housing, and we had finished collating the response to that. That's happened now, and we built that into the work we've been doing. Service specifications, which we were still in the progress of writing, have now been finished, and that incorporated feedback from care and support staff from that survey, internal colleagues, and learning from other councils, as well as the feedback that I talked about when I last spoke, where we visited every scheme in Somerset and spoken to residents both on a group and individual basis. We've undertaken follow-up meetings with every landlord to confirm the proposed arrangements going forwards, and we've undertaken a two-stage fair, open and transparent procurement process that's both compliant with public procurement regulations and best practice. And that procurement's been based on a tender that's split into 3 lots geographically. So the lots are a lot for the south, and that also includes the single scheme that's in Frome in the east, a lot for the west, which will includes all the schemes around Taunton, Wellington, and towards Minehead, and a lot for the north that includes the schemes in Bridgewater and Burnham. So in terms of the key proposals, first proposal is to award contracts for delivery of care support in each lot as detailed in Appendix B. To over time increase the overall level and range of need that is supported in extra care housing, and continue to develop extra care housing, the extra care offer over the lifetime of the contracts. There are tenants living in extra care schemes now. We know that any change in terms of the level of need we support will need to be gradual. It's not something that will happen overnight. As people move on from those extra care schemes, what we will be looking at is then increasing the level of need that can be supported, or through enabling people to stay in extra care schemes longer than they might otherwise have done so. We want to, as part of that, we want to introduce the ability to step up and step down the delivery of care and support overnight. At the moment, most of the schemes, the support that's available overnight is via what we call sleeping. So there's a member of staff sleeping on site that's available on call if someone needs support overnight. In order to support people with higher levels of need, what we would be looking to do is over time introduce waking nights so that care and support can be delivered by staff who are awake and working overnight in schemes. But that will be a gradual process. over the lifetime of the contract. At the moment, extra care is delivered in two different ways in Somerset. There's we call it integrated and non-integrated in terms of the housing related support element. And what we are proposing to do is move all the arrangements to a non-integrated approach, and that would be where the housing related support is delivered by the landlord rather than the care provider. And that's because we know that social landlords are much better placed to deliver that housing related support than staff whose primary role is to deliver care. We're proposing to introduce a consistent charging policy by equalising the charges across Somerset, so that the charges for each tenant in each scheme is the same, and that would involve removing the additional charge that applies in schemes where housing related support is currently delivered by the care provider, and where it would be switching over to the landlord. We're also proposing to consult on charges which haven't. There's currently no mechanism in the current arrangements to increase charges in line with inflation, and there's a proposal that we would consult on bringing that into the annual adult social care fees and charges process to increase them annually in line with inflation and benefit rates. And finally, there's a proposal to implement a consistent three-way agreement between social landlords, care providers, and the council. Because, as I said when I last presented, at the moment there is probably 14 different ways of that works in Somerset, and what we need to do is bring consistency where consistency is the right thing to do. So, in terms of the recommendations to the executive, I won't go through them. They are covered by what I've just said, and they are in the paper. But essentially, they are to award the contracts, equalise the charge, and initiate the consultation. So, final slide for me is just a really brief summary of the next step. So, the executive is due to consider the proposals on the 2nd of December. Assuming that they are agreed, we would then move into an implementation period from the beginning of January through to the end of March, with a contract start date of the 1st of April. And in parallel to that, we would undertake a consultation to increase charges by inflation in future years, and that would be subject to a decision following the conclusion of the consultation. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you for being in time as well. Has anybody got any questions? Emily.
Is there a major difference between the 24-25 figure, 25-26 figure? Although we've sort of agreed to not look at it because it's a lot of hassle. Is it significant? Thanks.
Overall, there is in terms of every rate. So we have rates for the shared care, the assessed care, sleep-ins, and waking nights. Every one of those rates need to decrease. And they do vary between the lots and the types of care compared with the current rates being paid. So if you look at Appendix B, it is detailed towards the end of that document. There is a comparative table between the current and just the proposed new rates.
Thank you. Yeah, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I think that it happened because of the competition in the market. That's the whole point of this exercise, and the tenderers want to win, so they put forward their best rate. So that's why we do this process, as well as a rolling process of doing it anyway. I'm delighted that it's been completed and that we can move forward. And I think people just need to understand that with extra care housing, quite a lot of the people are there for a very long time. So people are in our care in the same facility for quite a long time. So that the care that they get needs to be consistent. And even if there was a change of provider, there would be cheaper provisions affecting it. So you wouldn't have suddenly seeing somebody they've never seen before or anything like that. There might be a slight change over time, but it wouldn't be a sudden change. So it's a consistent thing. We were talking earlier about homeless, and I think some people might move into extra care housing for a short period, then out if they're in a situation like that, but most of people will be there for quite a long time. So, no, I'm delighted with this, and I recommend it to the committee.
Thank you very much. And having examined the tender process, it's very robust, and you know, I also want to say that for officers that put such a lot of work and then they sit through a 3-hour scrutiny, and then the annoying chair says you've got 15 minutes. So I do want to say we do appreciate the amount of work for you and Sally, and there's probably people behind the scenes that have to come today and then to sit through 3 hours and present to us. So thank you very much. And yeah, are we happy as a committee for this to go to exec and to continue on its journey and to continue providing this vital service that must be in the mix of helping us be more efficient and caring more for our residents and helping us bring the costs down. It must, to me, it seems that it must link up. So we are bang on 1 o'clock, and it says the meeting closes at 12:15. No, that's not true. Anyway, but our next meeting is Thursday, the 23rd of January. Here, so I can't say I'm going to wish everybody a happy Christmas, can I?
Yes, you can.
Some people I might not see in person.
Season's greetings.
Yeah, so thank you so much for attending and the efforts it's taken to get here on such a appalling day. Are we snowed in? No. Oh, what a shame. Right, thanks. See you in January. Bye. Bye. Thank you online. Thanks so much. Yeah, we appreciate you tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend.